Welcome back to our second panel of the day, India's growing role in a diverse global market. This panel will deliberate on how managers have readjusted to the new realities and what preparations are happening to improve India's role in the global market and capture the opportunity. Please put your hands together for our first speaker, a seasoned professional, Mr. Raviraj Rodrigues. He has over 25 years of core supply chain experience across five industry verticals with automotive, engineering, oil and gas, consumer goods, and fashion and lifestyle. He has been associated with leading brands, and his key specialities are supply planning, logistics, and transportation. A graduate in mechanical engineering and a postgraduate in supply chain management from SJM SOM IIT Mumbai, he's passionate about integrating technology in supply chain and has been instrumental in driving change through technology in all his engagements. Raviraj is a certified advanced open water diver, and his LinkedIn profile carries the tag Supply Chain Professional by Chance, Scuba Diver by Choice. A big round of applause for our next panelist, Mr. Himanshu Malu, who is building the pharma vertical at Udan. With over 20 years of experience, he has hands on experiences under all the supply chain verticals like manufacturing, external manufacturing, sourcing, SNOP, demand and supply planning, project management, logistics and warehousing, and customer experience. He has been leading end to end supply chain for more than 8 years now with geographical experiences within APAC. He has had the unique opportunity to lead commercial function for Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, further strengthening his business acumen and leadership. Next on our panel is Mr. Rajat Sharma. Rajat practices purposeful leadership through the lens of yoga and Indian wisdom. He is currently building supply chain resilience for Hamilton Housewares, popularly known as Milton. Also setting up a company-owned network of e-commerce operations servicing diverse marketplaces. He was earlier driving demand management and customer logistics in the international business arena for an organization with high growth rate across the globe. He has managed a diverse multi-location team of various origins and nationalities. Next on our panel, Mr. Vikram Srivastav. Vikram has completed his master's in supply chain from SP Jain Institute and has more than 16 years of experience in logistics, heavy engineering, and life sciences across Southeast Asia, Middle East, and India. He has occupied positions in supply chain planning, supply chain execution, and product management. Vikram is described as a go getter and recognized as a thought leader in supply chain practice. He is known for marrying supply chain concepts and practices in the pursuit of excellence. And our panel now gets complete with Mr. Vinod Mathur, Vice President Product Management at Blue Yonder India. He has more than 23 years of varied experience in the supply chain management domain. He currently leads Blue Yonder's manufacturing industry cloud initiatives. Vinod is a graduate from IIT Bombay and PGDM from IIM Ahmedabad. He joined I2 Technologies, which was earlier JDA and is now Blue Yonder, in 1998 as a consultant and progressed through multiple departments to his current role. He has been involved with many successful SCM transformation stories in different manufacturing sectors, including electronics, semiconductors, chemicals, metals, and CPG. Thank you all for joining us today. I now hand over the baton to the panel moderator, Mr. Sanjay Desai. Over to you, Sanjay ji.
Thank you. Thank you, Charu. Thank you, Prerna. And thank you, Akash. Thank you, Secretary Supply Chain. Thanks all my wonderful panel today. And most important, thank you all delegates and attendees who decided, some of you must have decided to sit back at back-to-back two sessions. This is all about you, right? This is your presence means a lot to us. Thanks again. As Charu rightfully explained, that India's supply chain has so much an opportunity post-pandemic, given what is happening in the world globally. The strategy for China plus one, Korea, Japan would like to get out of China as much as possible and actually move their manufacturing into some of the adjoining countries in Southeast Asia or even in India. And that means a lot of opportunities for India. There is a lot already happening in India in terms of the local movements we have. There are so many initiatives that this current Indian government has launched. Our panel today will address a few of these elements, parameters, and how organizations could actually re-strategize and rethink their value chain plans post-pandemic. Let me start with one of the youngest supply chains and one of the youngest companies in India called Udan. And let me get Himanshu onto the screen. And Himanshu, from a requirement of being very agile, being very customer-centric, how this whole horizon is changing the needs of supply chain to meet and survive in the changing customer needs.
Hi, Sanjay, and thank you very much for the question. And See, I think all of us have been talking a lot about strategy, agility for so many years now, but I think this is the best time when you can really feel it even more closely. And especially, if we see last 1.5 years, 2 years, we clearly see the horizon of our strategy has been changing. When we used to think about strategy, it used to be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, right? But now I think the strategic horizon has reduced to just 6 months and 1 year. 1 year with the pace the world has been changing. Even in fact, if you look at it, government's 5 years plan has now changed, by Niti Aayog, to 1 year execution plan, and then obviously they have the long term plan as well, right? And the reason I think, and if you really see the way the strategic horizon has been changing, has been reducing, that calls for a lot of agility in terms of execution as well. Because when you have to change your strategy every 6 months or 1 year, your execution has to be catching up with that, and has to be that fast as well, right? So the important thing is that you have to just keep driving your strategy into implementation in a very short span of time. Keep failing but keep moving on, right? Keep learning from the mistake, but keep improvising. So this is how I feel. I think the overall horizon of the strategy is changing, and this also calls obviously for more agility, for all of us. And we have seen that last couple of years, or last 1.5 years especially, if we see in terms of technological advancements, in terms of the way we have been able to implement some of these technologies, we have already moved 4 or 5 years ahead just in a 1 year time. And that shows how agile we have been, and how we have been all able to kind of uh, uh, able to implement some of these strategies at much faster pace. So I think this is a time where you have to just keep thinking fast and acting fast.
Excellent. Thinking fast and acting fast. Let's talk about acting fast. And Raviraj, to get you on the screen, right? And specifically talk about Make in India in terms of not just making it, but even getting it exported out of India, right? Uh, you have any case studies that you can talk about it in your real life?
Yes, in fact, I can talk about a real life case study of Alstom, you know. And if I have to talk a little bit more, let me just bring out this well known topic that's being discussed today, which is called the dual circulation economy that China is espousing, which says that we should have it internal circulation as well as an external circulation. Now, what does it mean? By and large, it means that the economy should cater to the internal market and also the external markets. So do not forget one for the other. And I think if I were to look at it for India, that's the one that is the way to work, and that's the one that works best, and that's the one that Alstom has also adopted. What has it done? It has set up plants in India for both domestic as well as for export, and it has by and large targeted about a 50-50% share of both. And how does it help Alstom? Okay, India is a very highly competitive market that we all know. And in public sector businesses, particularly Alstom is working in the infrastructure business where there's most of our customers are public sector. L1 bidder is the one who gets the business. That's it. It's everything else apart. Finally, it's the L1 who gets the business. So it's a very competitive market, and L1 bidder gets the business. So one has to be extremely cost competitive. And to be cost competitive in India, one needs to set up domestic manufacturing and distribution in India and drive all the localization of inputs in India. That's the way you can get your cost in control, as well as you get you can meet the tight timelines that your customers have. So one of the examples is the locomotive business that we won, which is the VAC 12 loco, where we had to indigenize 90% of our manufacturing for Indian Railways just to meet the cost targets. So the way the tender was given, if we have to win the tender and meet the cost targets, we have to make it indigenized. Right. So that's the good part, which works for the internal economy. How does it work for the global economy? Now, you also deal with global customers who expect the latest technology, and they want this technology to be incorporated into the products that we sell them. So, we get this knowledge of the external technology that we require. So we keep ourselves abreast on the internal technology, the latest technology. We try to use this latest technology, but at Indian costing for Indian customers. Okay. So we get a virtuous cycle, right? Yeah. We are able to, with the higher margins that we get from the global customers, we are able to fund the R&D for India, but we are able to set up a low-cost base for India. So if I have to summarize, any company that wants to compete globally has to come in India, sell to India first, and then it becomes competitive by default.
Fantastic. And I like the Alstom emulation of the dual circulation strategy. Let's stay with you, Raviraj, for one more question in brief. If we have to manufacture in India, which is like more like a horses for courses approach, as we can call it, right? In your case specifically, and you don't have to divulge any confidential information, but how you were either impacted or not impacted by not having the components of tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, which was enabling your manufacturing? Did you have any issues, or do we have the ecosystem already present for your industry type?
So let me put it in two parts. Yes, by and large, most of the equipment are available in India,
Yes.
but we don't have a very good, robust database. Nothing like an MSME database, etc., where we are able to. And by the way, 95% of our manufacturing happens through MSMEs. That's what we have learned. But we don't have a very good database to pick up all this. And some of these have longer lead times, and they have this sub-components that have to be imported. At some level, there is an import element, and there are some technologies we don't have. So what this pandemic taught us was that maybe we could secure our first level, but at the third level, we failed. And we didn't have adequate visibility to the third level. And neither did those level 3 suppliers look at how do they indigenize their parts, And so somewhere that is the new realization that we are also getting into, that not only do we look at what we indigenize from our vendors, but what is their components, and all the way down to the iron ore or whatever, at the
Yes.
earth elements. But
Yes.
it is still not as robust. But this realization has now dawned upon the most of the companies that yes, we have to look in that angle.
Fantastic. That's the critical element you said. The realization of that reality is an important element, because that is going to fuel innovation, and that's going to fuel ecosystem. Let us bring Vikram onto the screen and say, Vikram, what do you think from a pharma perspective on the same question? Vikram? Looks like we lost Vikram. Unfortunate. Vikram, you're still there? Okay. All right. So let's continue the same vein. We talked about Make in India. We talked about being agile. Raviraj brought a good point, and he said that 95% of your product actually may happen from SMEs in India, right? And which means that there could be some startup, there could be some small scale industries. I need to bring Vinod into the discussion here. And Vinod, India roughly said as the... Sorry, somebody said something? Okay, so Vinod, India seems to have the highest number of startups, right? And this is a huge scale for us. And if we go back to what Ravi said in terms of making in India 95% of the components, in your view, how can India leverage this opportunity to create a value and to be competitive in global market by actually manufacturing for others and being a global factory eventually?
Right. So of our earlier panel members also had shared that a lot of government initiatives which are on to promote manufacturing in India. My experience has been that that when it comes to product design, that is one area where it has again been my limited experience. I mean, it may be a different situation, whatever everyone else would have seen. But that is where I believe that we struggle a bit. We are to come up with, even if it's a manufacturing product or even if in the technology space, right? Going in a services kind of an option where someone has done the design for us, whether it's a semiconductor design or an automobile or a part design or a technology product design. We see a lot of startups who get into actually manufacturing post that or developing something post that, right? So in a way, we are, I would say, very good at offering the services aspect. So that has taken us to a certain level where definitely it has built competitiveness, both and especially in the technology space, right? I mean, and today it's difficult to differentiate a physical product and a technology product. Right? Even cars today are more of a computer which are driving you around as opposed to what it used to be, say, 10, 15 years back. So the services piece, I would say we have been able to show that we can do it very well, very, very well. We at least still have a good a cost advantage also. Where we need to kind of focus on is the product design part of it. And again, both from manufacturing as well as technology space, I do see that because it takes a lot of risk taking there. Right? I mean, you have to come up with an idea, come up with a design, invest into it, and then definitely your returns are high. There is also a high risk as opposed to going into a services kind of an approach.
Yeah.
So that is where I think we can definitely focus on and improve our competitiveness. And globally, if you see, most of the manufacturing companies in their design departments, I mean, there are a lot of experts who have Indian background or Indian origin experts. But somehow, I think we need to provide them that space or that kind of an environment where we can innovate ground up. I mean, that is as far as the like the large sector is concerned. Just to complete a perspective, I also, as part of my initial internships and all that, right, I was associated with an organization of one of our professors, and his organization focused on grassroots innovation, and it was very, very I would say interesting to see that as you go into the grassroots, there is a lot of innovation which happens. But somewhere when it comes into like an organized corporation, a company, something gets lost. And we are more comfortable running a business which is more services oriented. But on the ground, and I had the fortune of actually going into villages, talking to those innovators. And there is so much of idea, so much of innovation which exists, but we are not able to, I think, in my view, take it into an organized corporation form of it. So that I think is one of the areas where we should definitely focus on to build that next level of competitiveness.
Yes.
And move away from the services, only a services kind of a mindset, to actually creating the most innovative products from our country.
Yeah, and Vinod, to keep you on the stage and not put you on the spot here, but what Blue Yonder does is a fantastic package, and I've used Blue Yonder for a couple of companies that I was consulting, and as a consulting company, as a software, as a cloud-based kind of a company that you work with manufacturing and shipping and trading companies, don't you think there is a play for Blue Yonder here to create those sort of synergies and maybe stitch those ends and kind of be the sentinel and teach manufacturing industry in India how to do it best?
Definitely. And what we have done is we have come up with India's specific point of views and offerings, because one of my key learning has been over these last 25 years is that something that works in say in a European or a North American context may not necessarily work the same way in the Indian context.
Sure.
All said and done, it's a different way of functioning here. Sure. So what we have also done is fine-tuned and created offerings, technology offerings, which are more relevant to an ecosystem like ours. We have also partnered with many of the like our ex-employees who have now started off their businesses. Like, just to take an example, right, that we talk about GPS apps, and now if you have to do tracking, the first idea would come up is that, I need to give these smartphones to all my truck drivers and all the fleet and everyone. I mean, that's a very expensive proposition to look at. Now, one of our partners, what they have done is they said, okay, as long as somebody has a phone, there is I'm not giving them a Google map kind of a direction. I just need to know which, like, 100, 200 meter approximation, I'm okay. So as long as I can get the location through the SIM tracking, I'm okay. I really don't need a fancy GPS system sitting there, right? And so these are kind of, I'm just taking this as one of the examples, right? To say, okay, how do we localize
Yeah.
a concept which is around tracking to make it work in an Indian context where a majority of them would maybe just have a basic phone. They wouldn't even have a smartphone. Right? So
Yeah.
just thinking that kind of innovation is something that we are definitely uh, kind of pushing, making sure our partners also innovate in that direction to make.
Perfect, Vinod.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Fantastic. And glad we have Vikram back from Sun Pharma again. And Vikram, can you hear us? Just raise your hand.
Yep, loud and clear.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Good to have you back. And when we lost you last time, we were talking about the view that Rajat had given, actually. Ravi Raj had given. And we were looking at it from a perspective of pharma. What does it mean from a manufacturing perspective? Right? And we kind of, from a local manufacturing perspective, on tier 1, tier 2 APIs and bulk drugs, what is the scenario in pharma?
So pharma is quite different, guys. It is very regulated. It is highly regulated, unlike FMCG or FMCD or any other industry. Probably after nuclear aviation, pharma is heavily regulated. So any change of source is both costly and time consuming. But having said that, deglobalization is something that pharma supply chain executives are also starting to talk about, the new buzzword post COVID, so to say. But to be honest with you guys, it's not something that we are just started looking at. I mean, we all know that China is the factory to the world, and when it comes to pharma, our reliance or dependence on China probably is very high in terms of actives and key starting materials and chemicals. When it comes to the pharmacy of the world, India is probably number one by far, but we are definitely dependent on China on that aspect, and that is where the complexity comes in, because if you have a COVID like situation, or if you have port congestions post that, if you have power shortage that we are talking about in China right now, or you have pollution control boards coming into Chinese factories and shutting them down overnight, where do we get the source B from? We talk about L1 and L2 suppliers. Probably in pharma, for 60-70% of the goods, you have only one dedicated vendor. If he's gone, you're gone. So that's the kind of complexity we have built in our supply chains, and it's not by default, it's by design, probably, like I said, because developing a second source sometimes is not even possible, because he could be the only vendor in the world who's supplying that particular chemical entity or that particular molecule, which is needed for your formulation. So that brings in that additional complexity, I would say, Sanjay, and that is where we need a lot of support from the government, from the local bodies, in terms of infrastructure creation, in terms of getting the right technology, so that we get the economies of scales. We are able to compete with other vendors across the globe. So just to give you a number out there, Sanjay, in the early 90s, India was probably importing, in the Indian pharma industry was probably importing about 30% of its APIs from outside India. That number today stands at about 65-70%. So over the last 2 decades, that number has more than doubled, So we need to do something to reverse that trend, definitely. But it's going to be time consuming. It's going to be a lengthy process, because any technology, any source change we are talking about, it's going to take about 5, 7, 8 years minimum, in my take. That's my quick take on, the localization aspect of, sourcing in pharma.
Perfect, Vikram. Wonderful. Let's move from manufacturing and localization into growth in other sectors, and maybe upfront into marketing and channel management. And I would like to bring Rajat onto the screen. And Rajat, from a growth on the online sales perspective, right? Moving from an offline, which India was always used to, with a tier distribution network, with the C&Fs, carrying and forwarding agents, and whatnot kind of definitions there, to now going online sales, people ordering from literally anywhere, right? What are the challenges that comes along? It is not so easy to embrace for organizations the tier 2, tier 3 delivery mechanism, the last mile. I'm sure there are many challenges, Rajat.
Thanks, Sanjay, for calling me on, and what a wonderful discussion we've been having. Thanks to all my erstwhile co-panelists. Let me quickly get onto this. So yes, India has seen a lot of flux on the online channel. A huge set of our customers and consumers specifically has moved on to this channel. And not just is it easy, it was perhaps the only channel available for a brief period during the COVID era. Fortunately for us as an organization and as a country, online sales was introduced a couple of years earlier than COVID. But let's be honest, COVID has been a huge booster to this channel. Now, as all of us adapted to this channel, what we faced was, number one, we were relying on the Amazons and the Flipkarts of the world to kind of do the last mile. So we had never really gone to the depths of understanding the challenges of the last mile delivery, especially in the non-tier 1, tier 2 cities and states, right? And that's what perhaps has been the biggest challenge for everybody who's tried to move from offline to online.
Yes.
I'm very, very happy to share that a lot of startups and erstwhile startups have been great at enabling this transition for a lot of us. Organizations like ShipRocket, eBiz, Ecom Express, they're doing fairly well on allowing at least some of these organizations to get that experience. Now, the optimization on the last mile freight is obviously going to come along the way for all of these organizations as they mature, as they're able to absorb data. And this is really tertiary data. This is retail data that's getting available. If they're able to absorb and then define patterns and segments and heat maps on the India territory, it is then that they'll be able to get to the next level of defining, where do I need what kind of FCs and what kind of partners to deliver third mile, what's the traffic, who's the greatest in terms of delivery there. But as I see it, the world is expanding for us. There's a lot of organizations moving on that. Other than the last mile, I think a lot of us who were in the offline channel, and India has been a great, like Sanjay had introduced, we were great at managing the distribution network where we had super stockists and distributors and dealers and wholesalers and everybody, So everything that we did as any organization in that distribution network was just a part of the supply chain. So either I was manufacturing and delivering to a wholesaler, or I was trading and giving it to a distributor. Now, in the online channel, the biggest change is that we are delivering to the consumer. So there's a whole set of responsibilities that comes to deliver the right product at the right time, to manage returns, to manage customer service, to manage their ordering experience. And at the same time, obviously, Amazons and Flipkarts and Cloudtails of the world have the economy of scale to create these large FCs where they're dishing out, let's say, 50,000 pieces a day, right? And when you start with 500 pieces a day, you're obviously going to face a huge challenge. And that's, I think, where strategic vision of some of the organizations have differed and have made the differences in the results. For us, thankfully, we had chosen to go this path before the COVID era. And, we were half-baked even when we entered the COVID era, and hence we were able to kind of capitalize on this opportunity. That's it.
That's class. I mean, that's a fantastic answer. I would like to take this forward in terms of the opportunity that you mentioned and, moving from offline to online. And Himanshu, considering the whole transformation and not just for the manufacturing backend, the tier 1, the tier 2s, as Raviraj, Rajat and Vikram alluded to, right? It is more about being able to meet customers' demand, right? It is about having the new channels. So developing new competencies, right? Innovative thinking, how supply chain can play a critical role, not just for supply chain, but across and within the organization.
Yeah. So Sanjay, I always say that, nowadays it's not like, someone is working for supply chain. All of us are working for business and all of us are working for customers. And that's what we, the kind of culture or the behavior that we drive. And I just feel that the kind of competency and the thinking that we need to develop has to be more and more customer centric. We need to develop the kind of skill sets which are more kind of focused towards delivering the best in class customer experiences. If you really see how like a few years back when we used to buy groceries or vegetables in the we used to go to the market, right? We never thought that we'll start buying it online. Then we started buying online. We used to place order today, we used to get it tomorrow. But then it moved from 1 day to say 3 hours, then it moved to 1 hour. So then people started saying that within 30 minutes we're going to start delivering those groceries to your place. And now there are people who are even talking about 10 to 15 minutes. The time probably even you will think to decide what you want to buy, you'll get it at your place, right? So this is how the back end has been the front end has been changing, and the customer behavior, customer expectations are changing. Now if someone tells you that probably will you place the order now, will deliver you tomorrow, you are never going to be happy as a customer, right? And if you have to do all these things, I think what needs to be fixed is the supply chain at the back end, because supply chain plays a very, very critical role in ensuring that whatever customer promise you do it, how do you meet those meet kind of those customer promises, right? And that's where it becomes very important that how do you start thinking innovatively, how you start thinking that something which was probably seeming to be impossible maybe a few months back, a year back, is now the reality, right? And this is going to keep changing forever. The customer kind of expectations are the requirements will keep shifting, right? Another example I always give is that year back or 1.5 years back, when someone talked that new movies will get released on OTT platform, and people were furious. I mean, they said, I mean, is it will it be possible, and will people like it? And today, because of COVID, now see that all movies are getting released on the OTT platform. And if today, if someone tells you that probably we'll stop this and we'll go back to theaters, I think then we'll not like it, right? So all these things, all these habits are changing, our expectations are changing, and we need to build supply chain in a way that we can keep meeting those increasing requirements, those changing requirements, every point of time. We have seen that in last 1.5 years, many companies had to completely change their business model, right? And if and companies who have not changed have got vanished, right?
Yeah.
And if we have to change those business models, I think again the supply chain has to change. The supply chain also has to start working maybe in completely different direction.
Exactly.
So I think these are the competencies that we need to really develop in supply chain now.
Sure. And Himanshu, staying with you, there's a question from Mr. Abhishek, and the question is so pertinent, right? This is what sometime back actually Raviraj also talked about, the dual source. What are the key challenges for India, considering our logistical infrastructure? And Udaan knows it best today because you got about almost 200 warehouses all India. The unorganized transportation sector, and then not a very excellent ecosystem. And how do you play a pivotal role into the global markets eventually? What do you think, briefly?
I believe, I think this was probably the problem in the past, and now this has been changing very fast. I mean, today, even our unorganized sector has started using technology. They are also kind of jumping on some of the platforms which have got created. Like I think GoBolt is one of such platform which we also tried in the past, where you kind of even you might be unorganized at the back end, but then you use this platform and you come as an organized player in front of your customers or the companies who wants to use your services, right? So at the same time, obviously infrastructure has been improving in India. I think all of us knows that the kind of time that we used to take to send the goods from say Mumbai to Delhi some 5 years back is now reduced to half, right? So it's more about I think you use technology to also convert that unorganized sector into organized sector. And I think more importantly, as a company, we try to kind of be more we use the logistics as the edge, right? Edge instead of seeing it as a cost or the time.
Let me, Himanshu, Sanjay, let me just add to this. I think, as an answer to this question, the unorganized sector today is playing to a complete advantage for most organizations. Exactly. Right? They've brought out this wonderful optimized mix of low investment and usage of SaaS technology, like he was mentioning GoBolt, and there are a couple of others in the market today. They are today offering visibility. They're today offering asset-light structures. They're today offering processes. And let me tell you, this plays out for a lot of great advantage. We've been using SaaS-based platforms on even barcoding. So there were countries in the past that were expecting products from India with knowledge about where is it produced, where does the RM come from, where does the PM come from, and whether it is sensitive to a particular population, whether it is food grade, etc., etc., etc. And today, I know of a couple of organizations that have been able to get all of this information barcoded, and it's coming from the vendors, and it's going right into these countries where we export them. And there is complete visibility of all of this data. So
Fantastic.
I think, it's becoming a good optimum kind of a network with not so high costs.
Yeah. And Rajat, you brought a wonderful point is when you are unorganized and then when the whole sectors and industries are being transformed, technology is becoming easy, available also, it is becoming cheaper. Actually, the unorganized markets which are below at a certain level, they actually get leapfrogged because suddenly they didn't have anything, but now they need to just augment their strategies. They need to take a bit of a pain and then suddenly leapfrog to advanced economies and advanced organizations level. So these startups, companies, these SMEs are indeed able to do that. That's a great point. And I would like to bring in Raviraj onto the screen and take this point forward, right? In terms of India today being almost very close to 4th or 5th in the world with number of SMEs in India, right? And you brought a nice point in terms of Alstom's production being 95% made indigenously, and some of them are SMEs. Can you talk about the Samartha Udyog Bharat 4.0 and the opportunities for SMEs to make in India and be compliant to go cross-border? You are on mute. Akash, can you unmute him?
Am I audible now?
Yes, now you're
I'm sorry, it was on mute. So I was saying that was a very good question posed by you and very valid for one reason, for me at least. I was looking at all the initiatives that the government has come up with over the years, and this is the one I found very pertinent for the SMEs. Like I said, my understanding and estimate is about 95% of the manufacturing done in India is still done through SMEs. And the biggest trend that you see in manufacturing that is changing is this Industry 4.0. Which is what it is actually is Industry 3.0 with computers interconnected using IoT and cyber physical systems, right? Now, some people say it may be a marketing gimmick and what is Industry 4.0 and all. No, but I see that subtle shift and I see that shift happening in factories and over the years it will happen. What are the big differences that have happened and why Industry 4.0 makes more sense now is that, a lot of machines generate lots of data and which humans may find it difficult to analyze. But with a combination of big data, AI, and ML, yes, you can start analyzing it better, right? And these machines will throw up issues which need attention and will allow these manufacturers to focus only on those issues rather than looking at the entire setup. Now, why SMEs? Because SMEs have the biggest challenge in recruiting skilled manpower to analyze data and find smart factories to operate. If you look at it also generally, most of the urban people prefer to have their children work in, after engineering also to work in call centers or some kind of tech offices as we call for 9 to 5. And really at the SME level, for the kind of salary they offer, they do not get the best talent. So they may have to now rely on a lot of technology to augment that skill. Those skill will still be required, right? Yeah. And this is where the government of India has come up with this smart advanced manufacturing and rapid transformation hub, which is called Samarth. It's a joint initiative of the Department of Heavy Industry and the Automation Industry Association. They have come out with 4 or 5 labs, and there is one which is called the Center for Industry 4.4 in Pune. There is a IITD AIA Foundation for Smart Manufacturing. There is Industry 4.0 and ISC Factory R&D platform. And Smart Manufacturing Demo and Development Cell at CMTI, and of course the Industry 4.0 projects at DHI. And these are all available on the website. In fact, I would recommend all of us to go through that called www.samarthudyog.i40.in. Yeah, this is a free of cost initiative for any SME to register, and it will help. They will help the SMEs identify where they can use smart manufacturing and support. And today, I believe that will help us leapfrog to the next level of manufacturing, right? We
Fantastic.
have the skill. We will continue with our ways of jugaad working, which is the India way of working, which is do more from less with the
Yes.
SMEs. That's the strength of India. Let's not forget that strength. And if you look at companies like countries like China, etc., they started small. Back in 1980s, what were they? No one would
Sure.
buy even things in China, right? It has taken that time. It has taken the journey of 30 years. Maybe we don't need to wait 30 years, but by using technologies like Industry 4.0, we can really leapfrog and get it done in the next 4 or 5 years. And this is the initiative from the government which we should really leverage on. And it's not just the government; it's a joint initiative between government and the academia. And I believe that this will really help industries leapfrog themselves into the Industry 4.0. And Industry 4.0 will be the game changer for India.
Fantastic, fantastic, Raviraj. I would like to again go back to Vikram and say, Vikram, from a from a pharma perspective, from a bulk API, what is India's potential taking the 4.0 manufacturing up further to increase the share of cross-border? Also, given that we have probably the 5th largest SME population in the world.
So, I mean, like I mentioned in my first comment also, Sanjay, I mean, uh, the bulk manufacturing, like I was telling you, it's not like we are not capable of. It's just that in the early 90s we were making most of our bulks, but what has happened in the last 2 decades almost, there has been a series of technological advancements in the way they have started producing these chemicals. There are some geographical limitations with respect to fermentation, etc. Leaving
Correct.
that aside, the technology itself, the Chinese companies have definitely mastered that, and with that they have had a lot of infrastructure support and benefits provided from the government that has made them to scale up the volumes, which has brought them to the economies of scales where they can beat you on price. So
Yes.
most of the chemicals that bulks that we are now importing were getting manufactured in India. It's just that, for a generic manufacturer, if he's getting a product which is about $50 cheaper a kilo, it would make sense. Landed price I'm talking about. It would make sense
Yeah.
for him to go for the cheaper source, because the idea of having generic drugs is to make affordable quality drugs available to the global population. We are looking at the global supply chain and the global supplies. So it makes sense, for the companies to do that. Having said that, now the government has also got awoken to the fact that how heavily reliant we are also on China with respect to procuring all this, and that is where the government of India has come up with a lot of PLIs now, production linked incentives. In fact, the pharma and medical device industry has been allocated about $2 billion, about 15,000 crores over the next
Yes.
5 to 7 years to encourage to encourage entrepreneurs and manufacturers in this space to invest, and the government is willing to support them on this journey. I mean, and that is the only way we can do it. Set up more pharma SEZs, set up shared infrastructure with respect to how we can do pollution control, how we can
Yes.
set up water effluent plants, which can become like a community, in that particular zone, can serve to 3 or 4 industries in that zone, and everybody can share the resources and not need to invest heavily in these things. So these are some of the things that, I mean, the government also needs to do, and the industry also needs to do. And like I said, I mean, deglobalization even in pharma is a reality. I mean, even before COVID struck us,
Yeah.
about 30% of the companies were already starting to look at how we can de-risk our supply chains, I mean. And
Correct.
in the last 2 years, this has only got more amplified, where we have understood that, a event like a global pandemic can stop both your imports and exports. So that, at least one end of your supply chain is not disturbed. People are starting to look at how we can de-risk, at least on the key materials and the key bulks, how we can,
Perfect.
qualify a different source. Yeah, that's my take.
Excellent. Excellent. Excellent, Vikram. Yes, absolutely. Share economy, share knowledge, right? Now, I will take the manufacturing into a little further, and let's talk about reverse logistics. And I would like to get Rajat, because we talked about the manufacturing, we talked about SME growth, what we can do on tier 1, tier 2. Fantastic. But let's also give a thought for reverse logistics, right? Consumer returns and customer services. And what is the value that it can add to an organization if you have a real documented strategy which is executable? Rajat.
Great question. I think, Sanjay, a lot to talk about. I think return logistics in the erstwhile systems where we had our physical distribution systems was very, very much dependent on the partners. And we mostly all kind of percentages shared between us to manage reverse and damages or exchanges. But with the advent of these 2 or 3 channels, one is online, the other is retail, the returns have become they are obviously higher in quantity also. Today, because of an Amazon or a Flipkart experience or a Myntra experience, everybody, all customers, in fact, customers across all channels now expect from us that, we will take a product, we will open it, we will try and operate it. If it doesn't operate, if it doesn't suit my needs, I'll wrap it up and give it back. And that should be made available. That feature should be made available. That itself has caused the supply chains to give a high amount of importance to the cost that you spend on returns. Plus, like Sanjay was mentioning, what is the insight that you draw? If I start getting more returns on a particular product, and I think this we were just also having another question erstwhile, where we were saying, how does SCM now bring in new skill sets? Now, I'm going to link it here because today, this whole part of reverse and the data around reverse is bringing a lot of early demand sensing, early feature sensing, early change of consumer buying behavior.
Yes.
So there's a lot of data analytics that this reverse logistics is getting us. Plus, I think shared ecosystems with last mile partners have made it much, much easier to deal with direct returns from consumers. Obviously, it has become a challenge for all of us also to manage the returns physically, and we've all had to invest space and manpower and create processes around it. But I think there's a whole lot of inputs that we're getting. And this returns obviously is being managed by a certain set of team. And I mean, we may call it customer care, we may call it customer service. But in the end of the whole thing, they add a whole new value by consumer insights, product insights, and also buying behavior. So I think those three are my top picks from this space.
Fantastic, Rajat. Very well said. Right, and that brings me to another topic. Is something which we should do upstream in the supply chain is about risk management. Right, we talked about going cross-border. We talked about increasing your manufacturing turns. We talked about government initiatives for SMEs. However, there is one thing that all supply chains must do is risk management. Now, I would like to bring Vinod onto the discussion. And Vinod, how are the global supply chains adopting the risk mitigation strategies today, post-pandemic? And does India has a role to play or anything to learn from there, to which we can be applied locally when we are on a Make in India initiative?
Yeah, definitely. So as you said, I mean, risk mitigation as a strategy always existed. I mean, if you look at most of the top performing supply chains, always have a plan B. It may not be known to everybody, but there is always a plan B. But as the kind of the scale of the pandemic that we have seen, maybe even the plan Bs were not enough, right? I mean, only if you had a plan C or D, maybe that is the one that really worked. So it's more of how do you make it as part of like a systematic planning process itself, that how do I prepare my supply chain? How do I prepare my business for the kind of risk which may exist? Obviously, it will be to the extent I can visualize a risk. But as I said, the COVID situation was probably not something that in the wildest of the dreams also people would have been able to imagine, right? That it could be such a large scale. But risk mitigation, definitely a very important aspect. And I know personally, I know of many Indian supply chains large corporates and globally also a lot of the best performing supply chains have a team or have a role dedicated to risk planning. What if this happens? What if that happens? Right? And what we have done from a Blue Yonder perspective is also help them evaluate these scenarios. Because one is to visualize the risk. The second aspect to that is, okay, what does it mean? Right? What if a certain region completely breaks off in terms of connectivity? What happens? How do I quickly evaluate that kind of a scenario and come up with an alternative plan? Right? So that is the kind of capability that we have enabled for many of these top performing supply chains. In fact, there was one of the VPs that I was speaking to during the COVID situation, and they had been talking about this, but they had not explicitly enabled these kind of technology capabilities. And he actually shared that the current situation, the situation that we had, especially last year, was something which exposed a very smooth and lean supply chain was completely exposed because there was really no buffer in there. Right? It was so optimized, so well oiled, and so precise, like a clockwork which was running. So so as part of the risk mitigation strategies, what we are also seeing is building redundancy. On the technology side, it is a very well-known concept. Like
Sure.
When you talk about even your backup, right, your data backup, there is always redundancy in the number of servers that you have and all that. But when it comes to your physical supply chain, it's possible that many a times we may go too much towards optimization and making the supply chain so lean and well oiled that we miss out that there is some amount of buffer also which we need to actively manage and build. So that is one of the key focus which is coming in the supply chain, being able to evaluate these scenarios and if there is a cost of mitigating or cost of building that mitigation strategy, that is also getting factored in. Apart from business decisions in terms of multi-sourcing or local sourcing, local manufacturing to the extent it's possible, because these are things which take much longer to kind of operationalize, right? To build a local manufacturer or local alternative supplier takes time. But like in the Suez Canal issue, so many of the businesses that we were supporting were able to quickly replan and say, okay, if there is a blockage here, what is really on those containers? Which of my products are going to be affected? Do I need to airship some of them? Do I need to reroute some of them? So there is a tech capability and there is a business capability. Both have come to the forefront in terms of risk mitigation.
Fantastic. I'm taking one last question for want of time, and I would like Himanshu kind of to bring on the screen. And Himanshu, the question is, this is about VUCA world, and I thought you would have a kind of a similar situation today in Udaan that you can really answer. How would you suggest to manage product price in such a VUCA world, especially when the commodity prices are on the run? The products which come under essential category are very prone to cheap prices. This is a question from Mr. Punit.
So I think, so let me just read the question again, Sanjay. So the question.
Yeah, I will read the question for you. How do you suggest to manage product prices in such a VUCA world, especially when the commodity prices are on the run and the products which come under essential category are very prone to cheap prices?
Yeah. So first of all, I think that the just like everything, it's also the product pricing is getting more and more dynamic, and frankly, more than anything else, it's been driven by the competition. And today, I think that's what the kind of price war that we see. At the same time, one thing also which has been pretty constant is about on few product categories, the loyalty and the overall, the quality does play a very important role, and that's where we are trying to see that how do we keep commanding the pricing even when the raw material prices are really going kind of high, and therefore we take the product pricing high. But at the same time, I think there's a level to which you can change the product pricing. Competition will play a part, and therefore you have to keep optimizing your other inefficiencies in the supply chain cost to maintain the pricing, right? But I think this is still is kind of the hot problem right now for everyone. I just want to give a simple example of, say, proteins. I mean, protein powder. So the milk powder, the whey protein prices used to be in the range of around 400 rupees per kg, 450 rupees per kg a year before, while the while the price today is in the range of around 1,000 rupees a kg, and most of these protein powders or whey proteins are imported. At the same time, if you look at the finished product pricing, which has, so while the raw material pricing has changed by almost 200 to 50%, the finished product pricing have increased only by 30 to 40%, right? So somewhere I think companies are taking hit on the gross margin, but at the same time there's a lot of pressure in terms of improving the overall internal and kind of efficiencies to see that we don't have too much compromise on the final bottom line for the companies. So yeah, it's a
Excellent.
challenging problem, but I think we just need to keep see that how do we build the intelligence, how do we do the procurement, the right pricing, how do we develop the alternate sources without compromising on the quality. So so much of effort is going on. In fact, overall procurement piece has become very important last 1 to 2 years.
Thank you so much, Himanshu. Excellent and wonderful session, guys. Thank you, each and everybody. Thank you, delegates, as well. I know that we couldn't answer one question. Probably one of our speakers can write it down and then approach directly, or I can do that later. Akash will write it down for me, and then we'll definitely answer and go back to the delegate. Thank you so much, everybody.